High upon the rugged slopes of Mount Sinai, where the air grew thin and the silence pressed heavily on the heart, Moses stood, trembling, at the threshold of the divine. The mountain loomed like a throne of mystery, veiled in thick clouds that flickered with lightning. Below, the children of Israel camped restlessly in the wilderness, their eyes lifted toward the shrouded summit. They had followed Moses out of Egypt, their chains of bondage broken by miracles, but their hearts still wavered between fear and faith. God had called Moses upward, away from the noise of the people, to speak words that would echo through history. Every step Moses took up the mountain was heavy with the weight of destiny, for he was climbing not only toward God's presence, but toward a law that would shape nations and generations yet unborn. It was not just a meeting, it was the birth of covenant, a moment where heaven and earth would join in sacred words engraved upon stone. When Moses entered the thick darkness at the top, he was enveloped by the fire and thunder of God's majesty. The people below dared not come near. They could only watch from a distance as the mountain shook violently. To them, it was terrifying. To Moses, it was holy ground. The voice of the Lord was like rolling thunder, yet each word was as sharp and clear as a blade of light. God declared that he had chosen Israel as his treasured people, delivered from slavery to live as a nation set apart. But freedom without order would only return them to chaos. They needed a law, not written by man's hand, but given directly from the Creator. And so, in that fiery storm of holiness, God began to speak the words that would later be carved into stone, eternal principles not tied to any culture or age, but to the heart of divine order itself. The first commandment thundered forth, striking at the core of human loyalty: "You shall have no other gods before me." Israel had just left Egypt, a land crowded with idols of stone, gold, and wood. They had seen false gods fail under the weight of plagues, yet their hearts were still tempted to bow to what they could see. God's first word was a call to purity of worship. He alone was Lord, unrivaled and unmatched. The second commandment followed closely: no images, no carved likenesses, no worship of creation instead of the Creator. This law cut deep, for human beings have always longed to create something tangible to worship. But God demanded faith that reached beyond idols to the unseen glory of His presence. These words were not simply rules, they were protection against slavery to falsehood. They were the foundation of true freedom, a freedom rooted in worshiping the one who gave life. Then came the third commandment: "You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain." This was more than forbidding careless speech, it was a call to honor the sacred weight of God's name. To misuse His name was to reduce His holiness to common dust, stripping reverence from the very identity of the Almighty. The fourth commandment rose like a crown among the first set: remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy. After 6 days of labor, the seventh was a gift of rest, echoing God's own rest at creation. In the wilderness, where survival was a daily struggle, rest was not easy. Yet God commanded it as a reminder that their lives were not built on endless toil, but on His provision. The Sabbath became both sanctuary and sign, teaching Israel that their worth was not measured in constant labor, but in the stillness of trusting God. The commands then turned from heaven toward human community. "Honor your father and your mother," the fifth commandment declared, anchoring family as the first foundation of society. To honor parents was to honor the thread of life God had woven, ensuring that respect for authority and wisdom carried from one generation to the next. The sixth commandment struck with uncompromising clarity: "You shall not murder." Life was sacred, breathed into humanity by God Himself. To destroy it was to rebel against the giver of life. But this was not only about physical killing, it carried the weight of respect, justice, and reverence for human dignity. God was teaching Israel that every relationship, from parent to stranger, was bound within His covenant. These were not arbitrary restrictions, but pathways to life, harmony, and survival as a holy nation. The seventh commandment pierced into the heart of intimacy: You shall not commit adultery. Fidelity in marriage was not just personal, it was sacred, a reflection of the covenant between God and his people. To betray that covenant was to bring corruption into the community and to defile what God had joined together. The eighth commandment, you shall not steal, cut at the root of greed and dishonesty. In a people wandering the wilderness, where survival depended on shared trust, theft would unravel unity and breed suspicion. The ninth commandment came next. You shall not bear false witness. Lies could destroy lives, reputations, and justice itself. In a community bound by law, truth was not optional. It was the lifeblood of righteousness. Each word from God built upon the other, painting a picture of a society that could only stand if anchored in honesty, respect, and holiness. Finally, God spoke the 10th commandment, you shall not covet. This command did not deal with outward actions but with inward desires. It reached into the secret chambers of the human heart, where envy and longing could quietly fester. To covet was to despise what one had and hunger for what belonged to another, planting seeds of discontent, greed, and division. God, in his wisdom, ended with this command to remind Israel that holiness was not just about behavior, but about the heart's posture. A nation could appear righteous on the outside, yet crumble from within if its people were consumed with envy. By closing with this inward law, God revealed that his commandments were not a list of restrictions, but a mirror reflecting the soul's deepest truth. They were not merely for Israel's survival, but for their transformation into a people who embodied divine holiness. When the thunder ceased and the voice grew silent, Moses stood trembling, overwhelmed by the revelation. Below, the people of Israel cowered in fear, pleading with Moses to speak to them instead of God directly, for they could not bear the thunderous voice. But Moses assured them these words were not meant to crush them, but to give them life. Then, upon 2 tablets of stone, God himself inscribed the commandments with his own hand. Stone, unyielding and enduring, was chosen so that the law could not be erased or forgotten. These tablets were more than physical objects. They were a covenant, a testimony that God's voice had broken into the world and left a record that no man could change. Moses would descend with them, carrying not just stone, but the eternal blueprint for a holy people, chosen and set apart. As Moses descended the mountain, the weight of the stone tablets pressed against his arms, but it was the greater weight of divine responsibility that truly burdened him. The tablets gleamed with inscriptions that no human chisel had carved. Each word was etched by the very finger of God, letters alive with heavenly fire. Moses knew he was not just carrying stone, he bore the heartbeat of a covenant meant to guide a restless people into maturity. The Israelites, however, had grown impatient in his absence. Days turned to weeks, and their faith began to unravel like a frayed thread. They had seen miracles, seas parted, manna from heaven, water from rocks. Yet when the silence of waiting stretched too long, they craved a God they could see. Their hearts drifted back to Egypt, and in their longing for certainty, they demanded that Aaron make them an idol. While Moses cradled God's eternal law, the people below molded a golden calf with their own hands, bowing to what they had created. The scene Moses encountered at the foot of the mountain was a bitter wound against all he had heard in the presence of God. The camp resounded with the sound of feasting, dancing, and unholy celebration around the idol. The very commandments etched in his arms, "You shall have no other gods, you shall not make for yourself a carved image," were already shattered in spirit, even before the stone was broken. Moses' righteous anger flared like fire. With trembling hands, he hurled the tablets to the ground, and they shattered upon the rocks, just as Israel had shattered the covenant they had barely received. Silence fell for a moment as the pieces of stone scattered, a visible sign of broken trust. The people looked upon Moses, both guilty and fearful. God's law, meant to bring life, now lay broken at their feet, crushed by their disobedience. It was a moment of judgment, but also a foreshadowing of mercy yet to come. Moses acted swiftly, grinding the golden calf to powder, scattering it upon water, and forcing the Israelites to drink the bitter cup of their own sin. This act was not mere punishment, it was a lesson. They would taste the bitterness of rebellion, feel the weight of their idolatry, and remember that sin is never sweet for long. Yet even in his anger, Moses turned his heart toward intercession. Climbing once more into the holy presence, he pleaded with God to spare the people. He prayed with boldness, reminding God of his promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He even offered himself, saying that if forgiveness could not be granted, let his own name be blotted out instead. Such was the heart of a true shepherd, willing to bear the cost for the flock. God, in mercy, relented, though the scars of their disobedience remained. Israel was given another chance, and Moses was summoned again to the mountain's heights. This second ascent was different from the first. The cloud still enveloped Sinai, the fire still burned, but now it carried the weight of brokenness and restoration. God commanded Moses to chisel 2 new tablets of stone, for the first had been shattered by human rebellion. Yet even though man supplied the stone, it would still be God's hand that inscribed his law. Here lay a powerful truth. Human frailty may break what God gives, but his mercy always restores. Moses ascended with humility, carrying the fresh slabs upon which God would once more carve his eternal words. For 40 days and nights, he remained in the presence of the Almighty, neither eating nor drinking, sustained only by the nearness of divine glory. When at last God placed his words again upon stone, it was not only a regiving of the law, but a profound testimony that forgiveness and covenant walk hand in hand. When Moses finally descended with the second tablets, his face shone with a radiance that startled the people. They could not look at him directly, for his skin reflected the glory of the one he had encountered. The tablets he carried now represented not only law but grace, not only command but compassion. The people, humbled by their earlier failure, received the commandments with reverence. These stone witnesses were placed in the Ark of the Covenant, guarded within the tabernacle, a sacred reminder that God's voice had once thundered from the mountain and inscribed his will upon stone. They were more than rules to follow. They were the living foundation of Israel's identity as God's chosen nation. Every festival, every sacrifice, every step of worship would now rest upon the words etched in unyielding stone, words that would guide their journey through wilderness and into promise. Through centuries, these commandments became the heartbeat of Israel's faith, shaping their culture, justice, and worship. Kings rose and fell, prophets wept and warned, but the law written on stone remained a witness. Sometimes the people kept it faithfully, and peace flourished. Other times they strayed into idolatry, injustice, and greed, and the weight of the law exposed their guilt. Yet always the commandments stood as both mirror and compass, revealing their failures but also pointing them back to the God who had chosen them. The prophets would later speak of a day when the law would not only be written on tablets of stone, but on the hearts of men. Stone could break, stone could be lost, but a law inscribed upon the heart could never be taken away. Even then, God's intention was not mere obedience, but transformation, turning a wandering people into a holy nation. The story of the 10 Commandments written on stone is more than history. It is a divine drama that echoes across time. It reminds us that law without grace leads to despair, and freedom without order leads to ruin. The mountain thunder still speaks, not with the terror of fire and smoke, but with the invitation of a God who desires covenant with his people. The stone tablets were placed in the ark as a testimony, but their true fulfillment lies in the eternal Word, who would one day come to write the law upon human hearts. What began on Sinai with trembling and fire has never ceased to shape the world. The 10 Commandments remain not just relics of an ancient covenant, but eternal truths that call every generation to holiness, justice, and love of God above all. They were once etched in stone, but they endure as words written for eternity.